Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture about professionalism. My name is Adnan and I am a software engineer working for over 6 years, mostly in enterprise world. So today I'm going to share with you some of my experience, so let's say of my beliefs, how things should work in larger companies in enterprise world. So, well, at first, big thanks to our sponsors for helping this event to happen. And let's start. I will start with one very simple but very important question. Why do projects fail? So, what do you think? Why do they fail? What's the reason? So, any thoughts?
Bad estimate.
Bad estimate. So, any others? I mean, generally, yeah. So, things. Better organizations. Generally, I mean, it's not always one reason. It's always a chain of events that leads to the project to fail. I mean, it can be a bad estimation, bad vision, of course. The most simplest reason is like, okay, you created the project, but it didn't bring enough money to the company, so someone decided to shut it down or stuff like that. I mean, but it happens more often that projects actually start very well, but during the time they become more corrupt, they become more still not. It's not very easy to adapt it to the new markets, to adapt to changes in the market. So pretty much everything what you said and what I mentioned now actually has one very simple core reason in it. And that's that all those reasons have human factor in it. So let's say almost 99% of reasons why projects fails are due to people working on it, either from the CEO or to the engineers themselves. So why is it so? Well, I mean, why do human factor actually happens? So that's a little bit very hard questions and requires a lot of discussion. So pretty much I decided to talk with you and talk to you about one simple reason, and that's the engineering part. So because projects themselves can fail because engineers didn't care enough about the projects, they didn't work good enough or didn't develop the project in such manners that it will allow to thrive in the years that will come. So, and with that we come to the, let's say, the most important part in any organization, and that's its culture, its processes, its way of thinking inside the company. And also, let's say, today when IT is actually driving the companies and the IT sector, the IT part of the companies are often the source of ideas for the company. To have good culture is of great importance, so that engineers can have opportunities to express the beliefs, the insights of the projects, because they are the ones that work on the projects. So they can be the first ones that can identify if certain problems will appear or happen. And this is very important in order to help organization to adapt to it or to actually react to those problems even before they happen. So, of course, the most, let's say, the best situation is when you have actually such company culture where management decided to allow the engineers to bring ideas, to give feedback or something like that. So, this kind of thinking is, of course, different than how it used to be. I mean, where you have only management that would lead the company, lead the engineers, decide what will happen or so. But with the time, especially last 10 or 15 years, these things started changing mostly thanks to the agile processes, but also because even the owners of the companies or the people that are actually leads the companies, they saw that engineers are able to help the company with their thoughts and ideas. So certain companies decided to implement such culture, and benefits were there. So when I started working for one telecommunication company, regional telecommunication company, which actually had implemented just a couple of years before I joined. They implemented this culture of where the lowest in the hierarchy could bring some ideas that will be globally of the global importance. So, and that helped them actually to rise to the global leaders, because they could adapt to the market much faster than their competitors. And today they are global market leaders. And like one of those examples would be, since that telecommunication company is actually, they had only one part of the company's IT sector. They had, of course, others sectors. They set such culture where they didn't think about the IT sector as the cost, as the something of like necessary evil, which is very common in companies in our regions, where they literally don't like IT sector, where they think they're just eating the money or something like that. So they put the IT sector as some sort of generator of ideas. So many of the ideas that they implemented and which considered as the core of doing today actually came from that IT sector. It's not necessarily the project itself, but the way they interact with the clients. And so, of course, that's, as I mentioned, it's not always the case. Most, let's say, pretty much a lot of companies still, especially here in the region, do not have certain company cultures that allow everyone to try to allow them to do their best. They just only ask for them to do certain job, and that's it. And of course, that always, as I mentioned, lead to the problems and potential failures. But that shouldn't stop people from doing the right thing, to exit from to go out of the comfort zone, or to, let's say, to cooperate, to communicate with the higher instances or to each other, to think about how could they do much better work, or how could they keep the company and the project they're working on thriving in the future. So this is some sort, not actually, it's not like that someone asked for them to do that, but the teams should work on themselves, because they should have a place where they could be working. They could be happy. That's maybe the best to say. Of course, everyone from us wants to be happy on their workplace, but it's not always that companies have structured things around for you to be happy. So that shouldn't stop you from doing the right thing. So this is when we come to the most important thing, and that's individual professionalism. In the talks before, I think it was Andreas, when he spoke about the culture, he mentioned that things should always start from the individuals. So all ideas, all well-beings of the companies always starts from the individuals. They go over the teams or a group of teams and ends up on the company's level. Of course, it's not always the case that this happens, but this shouldn't stop from you to at least create your own bubble, as Andreas already said. There where you can try, where you can be happy, and where you can do a good job. So, and if you ask yourself, why should you do that, or why should you care if your company will continue to exist, if your project that you are working and someone is making a lot of trouble, so stopping you doing a good job, why should you care actually to do a good job? I mean, reasons, there are a lot of reasons. Let's, of course, most important one is that you'll be always rewarded for a good job. No matter what kind of culture you have, reward comes. Maybe not right now, maybe not in a year or two, sometimes it takes some time, but rewards come. Of course, there's always a fear from these actions, from the lowering of the wage or some, I don't know, I heard that some companies have inside their contracts, they have some parts where they say that if you perform worse in some certain period of time, they can lower your wage automatically. So let's say this is most basic reason. Why should you care? Why should you work at your best, even if you are not in such an environment? Of course, when you are in such an environment where there is a culture that helps you perform way better than expected, that's great, but a lack of it shouldn't stop you from doing this. The second, also is very important one, is reputation. Not only, let's say, your reputation inside the team, inside your companies, that's, of course, that's very important, because if you have good reputations, if you are someone who does the good job, who does in the correct way, and who can be reliable, of course, people will appreciate that. Maybe not as in the way that you are expecting, or in general, but certain appreciations will come. And of course, if you are not satisfied how they appreciate you, you can always change your job. I mean, that's always the options. But in order to even change your job, or ask for a raise, or ask to change the departments inside the company, or change the project, you need certain reputation. So even if you are working on a bad project, doomed project that you believe that is going to fail, that shouldn't stop you from doing the best, because it brings reputation. So another reason, more deeper one, is the moral. So because it's moral to do the best. So we are engineers, we are academics, most of us are actually academics, but engineering is still considered as one of the higher academic roles, and it comes with certain moral reasoning, and doing a good job is moral. So actually, I just remember one story. You all heard about Dieselgate in the USA. So, okay, I'm not going to talk much about what actually happens, but something that went a little bit off the radar, what happens a little bit later, the CEO of the Volkswagen Corporation in North America went to testify in front of the US Senate. So you can also see that testify on YouTube. There's a video at around 2.5 hours long. Actually, he discussed mostly about certain, let's say, economical, not much related to our work, but it's always good to hear what he says, on how he answers questions, in order just to have clear vision what you're going to deal with in the future, because one way or another you're going to end up working with such type of managers. But there was one question that is quite frightening. One of senators asked him, who is to blame for what happened? Why did they lied about on the tests? Why did they have such software that would lie on tests? So he answered with straight face, the engineers, the software engineers. He blamed the software engineers. Of course, most of the senators didn't believe him. There's not many of the people that looked at him testify, but it should be frightening for you that CEO is so easy to blame you for something that you are not generally guilty of, but it's still your moral responsibility. And not only morally, it's sanctioned. You can be sanctioned for that. If you, does anybody of you know who end up in the jail because of Dieselgate? Exactly one software engineer. One software engineer. That CEO got fired, but he got big check. Couple of managers got sacked. They got big check. They tried to prosecute one of the quality assurance guys who was responsible for make sure that the engines work correctly or stuff like that. He was tightly related to this testing. But since he quit the company 2 or 3 years before Dieselgate happened, he wasn't prosecuted. So it ended up, all the blame ended up legally on the software engineer who wrote that test, or wrote that software that would lie on test. He actually ended up in jail. He admitted that he was guilty, and he ended up in jail. If you, there's a lot of articles on the internet about that, so I do highly recommend to read you. And this is something that tells you what we can expect in the future, because so far most of us are working on certain web pages, certain services that do certain data manipulations. Nothing much harmful, but since progress of IoT or the things, the fact that, which I mentioned before, the IT department is driving the world today and getting everywhere. So, not for example, in the cars, maybe we are getting more autonomous cars. We are getting more automation in every aspect of the world. So, bad things can happen. And I'm not talking all about losing the project, losing the jobs, losing money. I'm talking about killing people, doing harm to the people. Because we are working more and more on devices that, if not working correctly, can harm people. And this is the reason why moral reasoning, why do we care, is going to be the most important in the future. And right now, in recent years, there is also a big discussion, especially on the internet, about how should certain autonomous cars behave in certain situations when they calculate, when they would come to the conclusion that they cannot avoid certain accident. Who should they kill? Driver or some people around the place? Yeah. Definitely. I mean, this is a very important question. And if decision that car makes is a wrong one, software engineers are going to be blamed, not CEOs, because software engineer wrote that piece of code. Trust me, it's for software engineers, but yeah, of course, testers. And of course, security, as I mentioned. You can end up without a job and back on the market, and you're going to end up with bad reputation because you didn't do a good job even if it's failure of the project. So this is something to think about it. And so what can we do with that? So of course, I mean, looking in the history around the 80s, 90s, when IT sector exploded, but projects were still, managed as they were before. I mean, they didn't quite make engineers happy because processes were very stiff, very not agile. So that's the reason why engineers come up with agile methodologies. And one of the things, also the same engineers that talked about agile and brought us agile also brought us the idea of software craftsmanship, and the fact that our line of work is actually craft, that we should care about it. We should not just satisfy certain goals, but also make sure that we do the best job, that we have high standards. Not only I'm not talking only about the code, about how software works, but among each others. I mean, collaborations and stuff like that. So there are many practices that are out there that actually helps you do a better job. So most simplest one is Boy Scout rule. Anybody heard about this one? So what Boy Scout rules says is when you're working some, let's say, a feature in some code, and you notice something in the code not directly related to your feature, but you think it can be some change in some better way or refactor a little bit, so it could be better, you're supposed to do that. So even if it's not related what you're supposed to do at that moment. But of course, that I don't mean making big changes. I'm just talking about small changes, like changing how things are logged in the log file, or I don't know, better names for methods, variables, or something like that. And if, of course, those changes are very small, maybe it doesn't sound like something that will have big impact, but when we come to the larger numbers of such steps that has been done during some period of time, it accumulates to a very big change and very important change. So you leave the ground much better than you saw it when it came there. So this is, let's say, most easiest way to start to work on yourself and be more productive. Second thing, and let's say very effective one, is TDD, test-driven development. Regarding this, I mean, most of people, a lot of people out there, and especially Uncle Bob is the one who started with this expression, states that the engineer who practices TDD is a professional engineer. So if you want to consider yourself professional, you need to practice TDD. But it doesn't always work well. And again, we come to the human factor. So the reason why TDD often fails in the real life is the fact that engineers often misunderstand the goals of the TDD. So TDD is not there to write tests. Tests are just product of this practice. Reason why you need TDD is the core idea of TDD is that the test actually helps you design your software. And you want your software to design very easy to use. And you can achieve that by making easily testable. So this is the point of the TDD. You want to make your software easy testable because of that, you can use it easily. And that means that even clients can easily use your software. And that also means that it's going to be used. I mean, it's going to be a good piece of software because the interfaces or exposing parts of your softwares are well maintained, well tested, and of course very easy designed. So what comes with TDD is the fact you should do less. And what this states is when you are writing certain piece of software, especially if you are using TDD, it means that you don't write big pieces of code. You want to write as little as possible in order to achieve something or to keep things very small. So especially I'm talking about classes, methods. So you want very small classes and very small methods because it's going to be easy maintainable, easy testable, and easy to understand the future. So I'm not sure how many of you are working in enterprise or large projects that lived for more than, let's say, 5 years. So how often you come across the code that throws somebody who isn't for several years in the company? In enterprise world, it's very often, yeah. I mean, you have big chance to find such piece of code rather than find something new or something that's wrote by somebody who is in your team or available to you. So this is reasons why engineers should write code that's easy to understand. You can achieve that by making classes, methods, or whatever, or scripts very small, very focused, and they should only do one thing. And this is reasoning behind do less. And when you combine with TDD, that means that your test also will be short. And of course, many engineers hate TDD because they end up writing they must write large tests because the thing that they are testing is very, has a lot of lines of code and does a lot of things, a lot of ifs, a lot of for loops, and that makes tests very hard to write. But when you apply this rule that you are doing very small, you're writing things very small and very focused on one thing, that means that you will always be able to write good test, very small test, and you can write it very fast. And this is come to this expression, you should start very slow in order to finish very fast. So the TDD combination with do less will help you with that. And when you achieve that, and the next step should be a clean code. Clean code, besides telling you doing those three steps before, also tells you several more things. Not only just writing small tests, but how those scripts, those classes, those methods that you wrote, should they interact, how should they be easy maintainable and easy to use and very easy to change. So if you want to, often happens that you need to change certain parts of your application with something new, or drop some old code or adapt to the new things. Clean code will help you to achieve that. So, and of course, beside that individual things you can do with those previous mentioning, and of course there are a lot of things also, it's very important to share knowledge. So now we are stepping outside that individual bubble or individual professionals. We are coming back to this culture of team, where you want to set up your team where you can share knowledge, where you can cooperate with each other, and sharing knowledge will help you thrive. So, in order to achieve that, engineers today need to have good communication skills. Before, engineers were just there working on stuff they were given. They could work individually and stuff like that, but software today is so large, enterprise world is such that engineers need to communicate with each other, and communicating with another engineer is very easy. Because you understand each other. But with the agile processes, you need to talk. I'll be finished very soon. You also need to talk with the managers, to the CEOs. Today, you have opportunities to talk with CEOs. Companies set up things like that. And not that, I'm always in opportunity to even speak with the clients. So engineers today need to understand their clients, their needs. And they not always come across client who knows what they want. They also often come to clients who knows something he wants, but engineers today need to be able to help them achieve the goals they should need. So, of course, take initiatives. So engineers should be driving engine of the IT sector, and by that, companies. Situation like this wasn't 20 years before, 20 years ago. So that's why we have agile processes, and one of the products of those processes is actually that engineers can have initiatives, and you should. And of course, not only give ideas, you should also take feedbacks, and that is one of the most important things in today's engineers' lives. You should be able to take feedback, to work on things that you did badly, that other things you did poorly, and work improving that. So many companies today have this setup of giving feedback from either human resources or from the managers or from other engineers at least 1 or twice a year, and that's proven very functionally. And professional engineers today should really focus on feedback and work on that. And of course, never go with the hype. so many projects today fails because people go with hype. And managers love, well, of course, engineers because they trust engineers. And the engineers decide to go with the hype. And I believe many of you know. And so things that failed just because you went with the hype. I'm talking about not only a way of thinking, but also with the tools and stuff like that. So, and of course, constant education. Professional engineer is not a person that graduates university and stop educating himself. He does what he has learned, or he learned in companies as when he came, and that's it, and he just works. But he needs to educate himself, to learn new skills, to always be in the quest for better ways of doing things. The Clean Coder books actually suggest even to go up to take around 20 hours weekly to educate yourself. Okay, maybe too much for you, but even 10 hours weekly taking for education could help you become better engineers and, of course, get benefits from it, either reading books or listening to certain podcasts or something like that. So this is pretty much the idea that stands behind software craftsmanship. So you want to do a better job, to produce better quality code, and by that, and communicate better with the environment, with the clients, with the managers and other team members. So that's it for me. I mean, I went a little bit shorter because of time frame, but this is very big subject. You can find a lot of resources about it on the internet, and there are a lot of conferences relating to the software craftsmanship. So at least take a look at it and see if there's something for you. So thank you very much. Any questions? Anybody has any question? Okay, if you have a question, you can easily find me. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed the conference.